Good afternoon and welcome to the Pompey Politics Podcast, where we discuss matters of international, national and local political importance, but in a calm, measured and reasonable way to get to the heart of the matter. I'm Ian Tiny Morris.
And I'm Simon Sansbury. And we're used to saying good evening, but of course it's good afternoon because in our change to our normal programme, in an effort to try and make sure that one of our guests doesn't have to get up in the middle of the night to speak to us live on the pod, we're streaming at 12 p.m. GMT. Obviously, the clocks have gone back today, so hopefully that hasn't thrown people out. But welcome to the show. So, who are we hearing from today, Ian?
So we've got the British Overseas Voters Forum. As some of our regular listeners will have thought, we haven't just lashed everything up because of the 1 hour and somehow managed to get ourselves 7 hours out of sync. But as Simon said, we've got people from different time zones. So to find the time that worked for all of us, we're at a lunchtime slot today to hear about British voters and their interaction with the process overseas. So a couple of guests who hopefully know what they're talking about more than we do. So do you want to do the introductions?
Indeed. So joining us from British Overseas Voters Forum, we've got Mike Toffrey and John Shardlow. Good afternoon and welcome.
Thanks.
Thank you very much for joining us. So let's get right into it. We'll just ask you both to introduce yourselves and talk about how you got involved in the British Overseas Voters Forum. And John, if I let you go first.
Sure, thanks. So I've been living in Malaysia now for since 2009. I'd actually been here previously for a short stint and then back to the UK, and then I came back again in 2009. And I got involved in the OVF actually after the 15-year rule was about to be abolished. I was actually about to lose my vote because I'd been away almost 15 years. And then the Conservatives put into the legislation that they would abolish the 15-year rule. So if you'd been away from the country for more than 15 years, you would still be allowed to vote. So I never quite lost my vote, actually. And at that time, we decided to set up the British Overseas Voters Forum of the fact that people could vote even if they longer, which a lot of people still, I think, don't know. And then also to pursue certain issues to people who live overseas. It was set up by myself and Bruce, a few other people as well. So some overseas and some that don't. Bruce splits his time between the UK and Thailand. And some of our people are sort of people who have lived overseas but are now back in the UK, which helps because they can attend meetings with MPs and things like that, which are very useful. So that's kind of my introduction.
Okay, lovely. Thanks, John. Mike, if you don't mind just doing the same.
Yeah, sure. So, spoiler alert, first off, I'm not an overseas voter. I'm sitting here in South London, and you can tell because I've got the sweater on and John's in a T-shirt. But so why am I involved? Mainly because I know people who are caught up in effectively losing their ability to vote, not their right to vote. And so I wanted to kind of help. So I sit on the committee of what is, quite a new organisation, but growing fast. We have members and supporters in 100 countries around the world, and we're keen to have more. So delighted to be here. Part of the reason I'm getting involved, not just because I know people, but I have had political involvement here in the UK. I should stress BOVF is strictly cross-party, apolitical, just simply representing the interests of British overseas voters and only on those interests, so not wider than that. But personally, I've got elected as a local councillor in London, so I have a kind of intimate knowledge of how the voting system works and indeed how politics works. So that's a bit about me.
Lovely, thank you.
Perfect. If I can come back to John, who touched on it slightly. So you said that British Overseas Voters Forum is a relatively new organisation. So can you tell us kind of when was it set up, and just give us a little bit more of the background, and what are the objectives of the group?
Yeah, sure. So it's been going for about 3 years now. Um, and as I said, it was sort of around the time that this 15-year rule was about to be abolished. So we sort of wanted to raise awareness of people, who had been away for more than 15 years, that you can actually register to vote again now, and then also help people with the mechanics of how that actually works. So yeah, it was set up then, and then we sort of brainstormed amongst us all what are the other kind of issues that we would like to progress through this organisation. And there's various ones, but one of the most obvious ones was the frozen pensions issue. So there's which I'm sure we'll come on to that more later. But there's various other ones around things like sometimes people have trouble getting a UK bank account if they live abroad. Um, People might want to send their kids to university in the UK, and that's quite financially difficult for some people. So there's all these different issues that we kind of brainstorm. We decided to adopt various ones, and we also do keep an eye out for new issues that we might want to add to the list, and then we sort of lobby people to try and get these things addressed. So there's been various meetings in the UK with MPs to discuss them. People from BOVF attended the Labour and Conservative Party conferences, and I think the Lib Dem one as well. So we've had people attending those and kind of then able to meet MPs and talk to them about these issues, try to get them progressed. So we've got members in different countries. We also have supporters. So members are kind of people that are willing to pay an annual fee. Supporters are more kind of like a free membership level. And then we set up a website which has all the information about the different issues that we're trying to progress and so on. And recently we added a kind of discussion forum feature to the website as well, so people can go in. It's almost like a kind of Facebook, but Facebook for people who are registered with BOVF. So that's pretty much a summary of who we are.
That's fabulous. Thank you.
Okay, that's fantastic. Was there anything else you wanted to add on that one, Mike? Are you all right?
No, I think John said it. I mean, the thing is, we've been going 3 years, but there's lots more to do. So we're very keen for people who take an interest in this to kind of get involved in whatever ways suits them.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And we'll get into some of kind of the detail as we kind of go through, so that'll help people kind of understand it, because I should imagine that for a lot of people, it's probably a situation and a problem that they're completely unaware of. So that's what's really great, that you could both spare us your time. So Mike, how many overseas voters are there, and is turnout good? Is it is it something that's being obviously asked for? Obviously, you've got people that are really interested in it, but is turnout good? Are people signing up and registering for it? That they're exercising that right to vote when they're living overseas?
Yeah, no, the mechanics is the thing, and that's, in fact, this is a good starting point, because if you can't exercise your right to vote, that's part of the frustration here. So, sort of the three numbers. There's who's eligible to vote, who are overseas but eligible to vote. There's a lower number who manage to get themselves registered, and then there's an even lower number who then can get their vote back in time. So let's just sort of unpick it.
Sure.
In terms of the total number, as John said, the franchise was extended a few years ago. It used to be an estimated 1.4 million people. It is now an estimated 3.5 million. We say estimated because there's no kind of central register of Brits who happen to be overseas for a period of time, which could be, months, years in some cases. So the total number of people we're talking about is 3.5 million, which is a very sizable number who have the right to vote in UK elections. Now, how many are actually then get themselves registered? Because you have a right to be registered where you used to live, where you have a local connection. So you get added to the voters list in the constituency where you have a sort of historic link. And at the last election, 2024, there was only fewer than 200,000, 191,000 of that 3.5 million managed to get themselves registered. So only like 1 in 20. And that number actually has come down a bit. One of the ironies that is actually when there were fewer numbers, the numbers who registered were higher. But so problem number one is only about 1 in 20 of the people eligible to vote have got themselves registered. And then problem number two is, having got yourself registered, how do you vote? Because you asked about the turnout. And we worry about that here when you just have to kind of walk down to the polling station. Or get a proxy vote or a postal vote, but the turnout. So how does it work when you're overseas? Major problems, because the way it works is, having got yourself registered, and that can take a bit of time, they then post you your ballot paper. Well, the post here in South London can take a week for a letter to arrive, never mind 5,000 miles away. So first problem is delay in the ballot getting to you. And then you have to put in an envelope, having voted, in envelope 1, envelope 2, send it all the way back. So another 5,000 miles. Well, not surprisingly, the number of votes that actually get back by kind of 10 o'clock on the day of the election day is really quite small. So I've got the numbers here on a screen. And these are numbers from the Electoral Commission. So these aren't our numbers. These are official numbers from the electoral registration officers collected. The absolute best is France, where 3/4 of those who received their ballot managed to get it back in time. 3/4 of those who asked for a ballot to be sent to them got it back in time. In Australia, I said 5,000 miles away, it's 6%. So again, only 1 in 20 of the people who tried to vote actually were able to. So at every stage of this, there's a problem which we need to fix. We could come on to what we should do about that if that's of interest.
Yeah, that's that. I mean, those are quite stark figures, aren't they? That's obviously distant. Well, I mean, on those two data sets, distance seems to be a very much the barrier.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I've moved on to, in terms of your question, kind of how does it work? John has had to struggle with how to make it work, and you've got personal experience of that.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So I mean, if we can sort of jump slightly ahead to that and say, I've tried both of the main ways to vote that there are. So when I left the UK, I had to sort of fill in a overseas voters form with the local electoral registration officer where I used to live, and then the council there kind of reminds me when I need to renew that electoral registration. So they actually started doing that by email, so that was quite good. So they didn't have to rely on the postal service for that part. They would actually email me a letter reminding me, and then I could do the registration form and send them back a scan of it. So that part was actually quite good in a way. But then when it comes to the actual voting, then they do have to mail the ballot paper to Malaysia, and the post here can be a little bit off and on sometimes. So it sometimes takes a month for something to reach here from the UK. And then, of course, I have to get the ballot paper back in time, which realistically means by the time I've got the ballot paper, I probably need to kind of FedEx it or something like that in order to get it back in time. So what I then ended up doing was I switched to use a proxy vote, because then I'm not kind of so reliant on the postal service to get it back again.
So that's where, just for viewers, that's where someone else votes on your behalf in the UK. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. So I have to kind of know somebody that I trust to do my vote for me.
Yeah.
Now they can, if they live in the right area, they can go and do it in person. But actually, generally they just do it they have a postal vote essentially. So then we're just relying on the UK postal system, which is definitely better than waiting a month for it to get here. So yeah, now I have a proxy who does my postal, or he does the postal vote as my proxy. So as long as you have somebody that you trust to kind of make the vote you want, then it's fine. You can do that. But I think many people fall into this trap if they've been away for a long time. Maybe they just don't know somebody that they could ask to do that. So then they're stuck with just postal vote. And then they're really relying on that postal system, which, as Mike said, it can end up with only 6% of people actually returning their ballot in time.
Yeah. Sorry, go on.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
So I guess if we look at the British overseas voter population, what sort of people are they? I mean, there's always when we talk about overseas, I think there's the subject of non-DOMs and comes up. So in terms of your members, kind of what sort of people are they?
I think what they're not is the stereotype of sort of expats sipping their pink gins while the sun goes down over the yard arm, that kind of stereotypical view of life of Riley. I mean, they are a cross-section of, ordinary Brits. So, teachers, English being, the international language, people that academics, because the best people come to the UK and some of our good people go to other universities, and there's quite a lot of flow. So there are kind of there are academics. There's obviously a lot of people in business, particularly in services, banking, insurance, accountancy. Again, areas where Britain tends to be strong with international relations, and people go overseas for work and then try and come back. We can talk about the difficulties of that. So totally a cross section, young people going traveling and then happening to stay on. So there isn't really a sort of stereotypical, there isn't a single kind of type of person. They are simply a cross section of Britons who, for a variety of reasons, for a particular point in time, are overseas but are still very much Brits.
Thank you. Anything else to add there?
I mean, you touched on, you implied there about sort of tax, because I know that's one of the issues that kind of comes up, non-DOMs, you said. I mean, by and large, so insofar as people who overseas have income here or assets here, they are paying tax here already. They may well have paid tax before they left and contributed to the national insurance, for example, but aren't using the NHS, so they've paid in, but they're now, because they're overseas, they're not claiming benefits and insofar as they may well come back, then they'll start paying tax. So the issue of kind of tax sometimes gets crossed. There's no taxation without representation, but it's not the other way around. It's not no representation without taxation. Otherwise, we'd say students can't vote because they're not paying, they're not earning. Pensioners are perhaps, take the vote off the pensioners because they're not paying taxes as much as they used. So tax and voting should not be aligned, in our view.
Yeah, well, I mean, taxation without representation, I think I remember that causing some sort of bust up a couple of 100 years ago. I don't know if anyone heard.
Tea, yes.
Yes.
So it involved polluting a harbour at some point. So
yeah, I'm just splitting between voting and tax.
It's a valid point. It's good to kind of understand kind of where the where some of the misconceptions are, and to try to allay them. So we really appreciate that. Was the next one yours, Ian? Was about retaining the.
Yeah, so I was just going to touch on the extension on how does it work, which is that question around, and I guess it's difficult to answer for 100 different countries, but do a number of your members get to participate in the democratic process where they live? Because I guess one of those questions is, and I think you touched on it there, is there are some people who might say, well, you've chosen to make a life elsewhere. Do you get to dip your toe in democracy where you live, but also still have a hand in democracy back in the UK?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think I can probably take that one. So one of the MPs that we, or one of our people met recently, actually expressed this view that, well, if somebody's living overseas, then they should vote there, not in the UK. And I don't think they're aware of the reality of the situation, really, which is that in many countries, you have absolutely no chance of voting there. I mean, I definitely will never get a vote where I live, but I pay lots of tax here. So, it's. I think it's only fair that you get to vote somewhere, and if you can't vote in the country you're in, then it's good that we can now vote in the UK, even though I've been away for more than 15 years. Now, I don't know if it's the same everywhere. It probably isn't. I think in Europe, there's probably a high chance you would get a vote in a European country, at least in some kinds of elections. I think in the UK, we give people the vote in local elections, even if they're not, actually a British citizen. Probably not in general elections. So I think it varies a lot by country. But yes, there's definitely a lot of countries like all the ones around where I am. I think you would never get a vote. And it's extremely hard to become even a permanent resident, and very, very hard to become a citizen. So only way to get a vote is to become a citizen, really, and that's practically impossible in many countries.
And I think those are pertinent discussions, aren't there? We're seeing a lot of discussions in the UK about permanent residency, indefinite leave to remain. And again, it's interesting to hear that. I think you said you've been living in Malaysia for 16 years now, but still not considered to be quote unquote permanent, or with very little chance of becoming a citizen.
That's right. Yeah. So in fact, my wife is Malaysian, so you would think being married to a local, you would have more chance of getting permanent residence at least. But I've tried, and it's extremely difficult. I haven't managed to do it yet. So it can be very, very hard. They jealously guard even the permanent residents in some countries.
Perfect. Thank you.
It's perhaps worth adding, or at least sort of challenging the notion that kind of people go overseas permanently and therefore, in a sense, should lose any connection back, because quite often people come back if they're, depending on their work situation, they may be going overseas working for a period, coming back for a period, and then maybe going, depending on the nature of their work. They may have, well, they almost certainly will have kind of dependent, parents or extended family. So there are lots of connections that they would come back even just to visit. They quite often want their children, if they're going to university, to come back to kind of the mother country, to have a British, university. So this idea that there's a kind of, you cross the Rubicon, and it's a fluid situation, and that's what why people should retain the right to vote, because they have a stake in the country, even if they're not kind of living here full-time permanently.
And that probably leads us on to our next question, which is, obviously it's difficult with such a diverse membership organisation, but in broad terms, why is it so important to retain your right to vote in the UK?
Yeah, I think for me, it's partly about because so many of my family and friends still live in the UK, so it's nice to be able to have some influence over the way the country goes, and also the fact that we may move back to the UK as well at some point. And so again, there are things that are quite important to have some influence over. I think like the Brexit vote was an interesting one. So that obviously affected the places we could go and live. Obviously, we had a lot more countries we could have gone to live in prior to that. But yeah, that didn't go the way I hoped. But as a result, at least I got a vote in it. And I did have a vote at that time in the referendum. So yeah, it is quite important, I think, to be able to vote somewhere. And certainly if you can't vote in the country you're in, then it's good to be able to vote in your home country, or the country that you're actually from.
Your perspective, John, what do you hear from the members?
Mike, sorry.
Yeah,
sorry,
no. I'm just giving John the opportunity to do a supplementary, but certainly, so from members, so I'm not, I said up front, I'm not overseas, so I retain my right to vote here. I think it would, suppose I did go overseas, well, maybe, and then I married someone who was not British, under the spousal visa rules, we couldn't come back as a couple. There's no automatic right for somebody who's married a non-Brit to have their married life in the UK. So we can talk about that in a minute, but having some tenuous through having the vote, having some say over the rules that are set here that affects my right to a family life when I'm outside the UK. Can I come back with my kids or with my spouse? I just think it's a matter of kind of civil liberties and human rights that people have a say. So that's certainly the impression I get from our members, people who are in John's situation, for example.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Mike.
Yeah. And is it worth expanding on? You mentioned about the kind of the spousal situation. What you're referring to there? Do you mind just kind of expanding that quickly for our members?
Yeah, I mean, I could touch on that. So, I mean, as you know, I'm married to a Malaysian. So, in Malaysia, I'm allowed to stay here under a spouse visa, and there are some requirements, things like minimum income. But in Malaysia, the minimum income requirement is way lower than it is in the UK. So, if I wanted to come to the UK at the moment, I'd be okay because I'm still earning. But if I was retired, I think it would be very difficult to meet that minimum income requirement. So we might struggle to come back to the UK at all if we wanted to stay together as a family under those minimum income requirements once I'm retired, which could happen in the next 5 years or so. So that's kind of an interesting one. The spouse visa rules. The other big thing is frozen pensions. So if I stay here, I would get a state pension when I reach the age of 67. I think it's still 67. And then it would be frozen at that level forever. So I wouldn't get the increments each year because of where I am. But if I lived in the USA, for example, I would get them. Or even if I lived in the Philippines, I would get them. So so I think being able to have a vote and perhaps influence that is quite important. And a lot of our other members feel that. We have a lot of members who join because of the frozen pension issue. And the fact that they're living off a frozen pension that's frozen when they reach the age of whatever it was when they're allowed to start collecting their state pension.
But it's frozen in some countries, but not others. Is that what?
Yes, it's very strange because it's not even. It seems to relate to when whether or not they've negotiated some kind of reciprocal agreement with that country. So I think because the Philippines has so many overseas workers, the Philippine government must have decided they wanted to negotiate this reciprocal agreement, and that affects Brits that happen to live in the Philippines as well. So it's and I think the US has negotiated something, but Canada hasn't. So Canada, if you get a frozen pension in Canada, but if you move over the border into the US, it becomes unfrozen again. So it's a bit of a strange situation.
And it's a classic example of where rules here in the UK are disadvantaging and discriminating against Brits overseas. So here, there are about 12 million pensioners, and triple lock has been a big issue. All the political parties have signed up for, because pensioners were quite a poor group, but we've had the triple lock pension increase. So pensioners now are reasonably well protected in the UK. But exactly as John says, the norm is to freeze it. So you draw your pension, John will not get a penny more, however long his pension lasts, from day one, whereas I will have the triple lock and will get an increase. And the only exception is where, as John says, certain countries have negotiated and the British government has conceded, okay, we'll give our people if you give your people, etc., etc. And so there's 1 million pensioners overseas, 40% of whom are not allowed an increase in the pension that they have contributed to when they were here earning, paying national insurance. Outrageous. And the only reason it's not changing is because obviously it's quite costly. Not initially. It's only kind of 2 or 3%, whatever. But over time it would get and obviously anyway we could go into why the government isn't doing that. But that's a classic example of why overseas Brits would be engaging.
But it's a specificity that probably most people aren't aren't following or aware of. So it's really kind of interesting to kind of pull the lid back on that one a little bit. So kind of talking along those sorts of lines, what sort of, and John, you mentioned earlier on about you were getting email reminders about your eligibility to vote. What sort of communication do you receive from the government? Is it just that kind of thing? Are they letting you know if things change, or what sort of stuff?
Yeah. So actually, it was interesting when I first moved here. I think the very first time, which was 2004, I looked into should I sort of register with the High Commission here and let them know, I'm here and I'm living here for a while. And there was a way to do that, and I did it. But they never ever communicated with me after that. They just knew I was here, but they didn't. So I don't think the High Commissions really get involved at all in that. It seems anyway. But the things I get actually from the UK, I would say, is yes, the local council where I used to live send me my reminder, keep registering to vote, and that's quite good because they do it digitally now, and I think that's really good that they kind of move with the times. And then the HMRC send me my tax return every year, but they do that in paper form, and I have to return it in paper form because they don't support the pages that I would need to be able to do through their free digital system. They don't support the pages that would allow overseas people to do their tax return online digitally. So you have to actually send it back in paper form, which is something I raised recently with the HMRC, and they've replied to me to say that it's one of these things that's sort of, I guess you could say the response is kind of it's on the to-do list, but I didn't get a strong feeling it was going to be done anytime soon. So.
Well, it's HMRC. I guess they don't do anything anytime soon other than asking people for money. But it just seems a bit backwards that the people that very much need to not have to be relying on Pigeon Post is the people overseas, and surely it's in everybody's interest to do that. Sorry, that I'm going to calm myself down on that one because it just seems bonkers.
Yes, I've always thought it was very kind of the wrong way around. Let's say. I mean, there are other groups apparently. In fact, they told me in this letter, in their reply to me, they said, that you're not the only group effectively that are affected because ministers of religion apparently don't have the pages for them. But I thought, well, okay, but if I was a minister of religion in the UK, at least I can just drop it in the post and it's going to get there in 2 days or something. Not like I have to, I actually send mine by my tax return back by registered post just to make sure it gets there.
Yes, it's arrived. Yeah, but sorry, that just sounds like a non-answer. It's like because it's really difficult to create a web page. It's really, I mean, obviously there's a skill in doing it properly and making sure it's got all of the things in it, but all of the difficult stuff is at the beginning, and that's already done. You just need to add some other. No, I'm sorry. Yeah.
We'll let you calm down for a second there, Simon. So you're getting some frustrating communication from the government. You mentioned that you had representatives at the conferences. How do the different political parties treat or engage British voters overseas? Are you of interest to them, or perhaps a bit more of an annoyance? And I'll ask Mike to answer that one first.
Yeah. Well, it's very variable, but generally not. You see, so let's just go back to the numbers. So those 200,000 who are on the register, they're spread around 600 constituencies. Because of the demographics, some constituencies have 10 or 100 overseas voters. Some have a couple of thousand. And that's a sizable group of voters. So you would have thought the politicians would take a real interest, and that's less than some people's majorities. And in a tight race, those overseas voters could swing it. The practical problem, though, is that they don't. So obviously, I'm registered here. I'm on the electoral register. The political parties can come and knock on my door, can come and put leaflets through my letterbox, can come and get me out to vote. How do you do that when somebody is overseas? Well, there's a registered overseas, there's a UK address where the vote is linked, but obviously they're not living there, so there's no point going knocking on that door. John's address is known to the electoral registration officer, but they don't routinely give it to the political parties. And even if they did, how do you get in touch without an email? And yet, as John said, they've got the email. So why don't we have a kind of tick box? Would you agree that this email can be given to registered political parties only for the purpose of communicating to you about your right to vote? Simple change that would actually make it easier for people to get in touch with you. Otherwise, you're literally sticking stamps on envelopes and sending them across at costs being exorbitant. So there's a real problem in just the mechanics, even though the numbers should make the politicians sit up and take notice. Then on the issues, I think it's probably linked to the feeling that they're not really a voting bloc. So they can't, well, you talk to people and say about these issues, frozen pensions, visas, university fees, all the issues that are on our website. And if people want more, they can go and take a look at bovf.org.uk, and it's all set out there, the problems. They kind of sympathize when you tell them, oh, I didn't know. But actually doing something about it is what, in a sense, we're here to try and drive it up the political agenda.
And that makes sense. It's an issue we've covered on the podcast before. We know during local elections, there are tens of thousands of trees that march off to the printers to be printed with shonky looking bar charts, only to go from the mat of the majority of houses straight into the recycling. But I guess if your house is in Australia or Malaysia, you're not going to get that. So it's almost an amplification of the issues we see with local democracy, hearing the pitch of the candidates that they want to vote on. So is it really just down to an individual? Because we talked about local constituencies. I guess your members have to do some online sleuthing to actually find out about the people who want to represent them.
Yeah, well, during the last election, we were still in our early days, but even then we were able to, in selective constituencies, approach the candidates across the parties, put it to them, well, what's your policy on spousal visas or university fees or whatever? And some of them were actually quite good at engaging. Others just simply either ignored us or referred us to the party headquarters for the standard answer. So where the candidates took an interest and then got elected, we've been able to follow them up. So there is some interest. There are some people who do get it across all the parties. I won't say that one party is better than another. So, some parties, obviously the Conservatives brought in the extension of voting. Lib Dems are in favour of sorting out the voting system. So with overseas constituents, here we are. There's the registration. So one of the things we want to see is, as well as just publicising to these 3 million people that you do have a right to vote if you get yourself registered, and here's how. So already the process has started. Thank you. When you have, what we would like to do is when you have some contact with officialdom in the UK. So, for example, if you renew your passport, that should, at that point, you're in touch with the bureaucracy here. They should refer you through to get your vote registered, or any other kind of way that you're engaging with officialdom, and then go on the mechanics of how to vote. Other countries do this very successfully. Instead of posting the ballot paper out, takes a month to get to John, why not have it able to be downloaded or emailed, but as an attachment or something, even if you still insist on people signing it, in person, so that there's no question of hacks or anything. So you get the ballot paper out to people quicker. That would double the sort of return rate probably. And if you allowed embassies, say a week before, set a deadline a week before polling day, to say if you can get your ballot paper back to the embassy or the consulate, then they will put it in the diplomatic bag, send it back overnight, and then distribute it, through the British postal system. So there's some very simple things to do to kind of make this whole process easier, to help political parties engage on the issues and people to exercise their right to vote, which is what we want them to do.
Does sound like an outbreak of common sense is due.
Which is what your podcast is all about, I think. So we're delighted to be here.
we try. We've got a couple of comments that I just thought so that I thought I'd share. So we've got a couple of Gareths, which is kind of an interesting coincidence. So we've got one Gareth talking about they're a pensioner overseas, and then another Gareth basically saying that they had to re-establish their UK residency because when inflation was bonkers. With the frozen pension, it was absolutely unsustainable. So definitely some problems that are definitely being felt widely there. So interesting one. Where were we up to? Sorry, I've kind of lost my place a little bit. Was yours?
No, it's yours for 9.
Oh, thank you very much. So we've talked about how it kind of works, and you've talked, John, a little bit about the extension of the franchise. Have there been any recent changes, or are there any planned changes that are coming up that will either make it worse or better? We've got some good ideas there of ways that could be that there are options, but is there anything that the government is actually doing or has recently done that's changed things?
Well, apart from the removal of the 15-year rule, I don't think there's anything currently kind of working its way through that is around any of the issues that we've
Well, there's an opportunity coming up because there's a legislation about to go through Parliament extending the vote, reducing the voting age to 16. Whatever you think about that issue, we don't have a point of view, but the present government and the Parliament is likely to vote for it, is extending the ability to vote by age. So we would like to say, how about extending the ability to vote for people who already have the right, just by making it easier? And so we would certainly look to the politicians to make some changes on the voting arrangement. We're not at this point. I mean, the ultimate solution is probably when you've got 3 million people registered to vote, to move to overseas constituencies, because there's a slight conundrum here that these Brits overseas are registered where they used to live, in a sense, not where they now live. So the French have overseas constituencies. The French have one getting on for 2 million, 1.7 million overseas voters. The Italians, likewise, they have nearly 5 million overseas registered. How many of our 3 million would actually register? But once you're up into the millions, then the logical thing to do is to have geographic constituencies overseas, rather than putting those 3 million, shoehorning them into Sunderland or Glasgow or wherever you used to live. But that's for the future. I mean, let's cross that bridge when we get there. Let's get a few more people registered to vote first.
It's a bit of I guess it's a bit of a kind of catch-22, isn't it? It's because as a voting bloc, you're not able to kind of make that much. You're not a block of voters that a particular party is necessarily feels that they'll have a benefit from basically getting more of you to vote, but also the fact that there is a large proportion of British overseas citizens that aren't either registered to vote or haven't exercised their registered to vote right to vote, or have exercised it but can't get it back in time because the process seems to be stuck in 1895. It kind of like, it's almost like, but they can't do that because it's not impacting them vote wise, but the votes. But until they sort the votes out, it kind of, I don't know. It just kind of seems very, very kind of cyclical in that respect. And I don't know, mate. Would centralising them in, as you said, having overseas voters constituents, that would presumably make it easier to manage and maintain them, rather than every single council having to worry about how to make sure they manage their ex-residents that are living overseas. Surely that, I don't know, it sounds like it makes sense.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, the other good thing for if you have an MP that covers, they can focus on the kind of problems that the people that live in those countries might face. Because I think actually even amongst people who live overseas, the sort of problem somebody, say, in Europe might face would be different from somebody that lives in Southeast Asia or Africa, or so they can kind of become more expert at those problems. Whereas my normal MP in the UK, probably a single-digit % of his constituents live overseas, so he's not going to really become that expert in any issues that you might face.
You're not so bothered about the potholes either, I guess.
No,
yeah. And the other thing is to move it on. I mean, well, obviously we're concerned about voting, but if overseas Brits had more visibility, they would be seen much more as the asset that I think they are. We struggle economically in this country. Historically, we've been very open for historical reasons, English language reasons, because of professional services and banking and so forth. We're an open economy. We should be viewing Brits who happen to be overseas as a kind of asset for helping us, us back home, whether it's with our trade, our exports, universities. We haven't talked about university fees yet, and so forth. So I just think if there's more visibility of this asset base that is British citizens who happen to be overseas, through voting and through everything else, we would just be better as a country, a better democracy and more productive, rather than the current, kind of life stops at Dover sort of thing, at the White Cliffs of Dover. We put up a wall and we keep people out and we stop people coming back, which is the crazy thing.
Yeah, it does seem kind of strange. But that kind of leads us nicely on to our next question, Ian, doesn't it?
Yeah. So in terms of we've talked a little bit about the process. If there's one thing that you would ask either the current or future government to do to make life easier / better for overseas voters, what would it be?
Good question.
Shall I start with I'll start with the university fees one, because there's a few things, and I think we'll probably talk about some of them as well. But university fees is very interesting. If you're a Brit and you live overseas, and your child is also a British citizen, or they have a passport from the UK, if they go back to the UK to university, they will be treated as a foreign student. So they'll have to pay probably 3 or 4 times the rate that a British kid who's lived there, for the last X years would pay. And that seems a bit strange to us. I mean, we're not saying they necessarily should get exactly the same treatment as somebody that's been there, gone right through school, done O levels and A levels, or GCSEs and A levels, but that they shouldn't be treated as if they were actually a foreign student because they are British. So we're kind of suggesting there should be a kind of a middle ground between the two, so that that even if, say, my daughter goes back when she's 18, she shouldn't be treated as if she's actually a foreign student because she has a British passport. So that's quite a key one. I think maybe Mike, do you want to talk about one of the others, unless we?
Yeah, well, maybe just following on the university fees, because we think we've done some modelling, and exactly as John says, if you had a middle category of, as it were, British students overseas, so currently you're either British or foreign, and the two fees, the UK fee of £9,000 doesn't, so the universities say, cover the costs. So they like to have overseas students at double, treble the rate to subsidise the UK thing. We're saying let's have a middle fee, exactly as John says, that kind of covers its cost. And we think that actually that will increase the number. We've done some spreadsheet modelling. We think that will increase the numbers of people who come. And aside from so actually the universities will get more money, actually, probably, depending on your modelling. But aside from the money, why would we be saying to Brits who are overseas, whose kids, surely we want the kids to kind of feel part British, to maybe come back and work here, to generally be part of this wider, bigger British family, rather than saying, oh, you're overseas for more than 3 years, so you can't have a home fee, so now we're going to charge you an overseas student like we charge the Chinese and everybody else that we're trying to. So I just think that's another example of kind of, if you stop and think about it, there's a rational way through here that there's win-win for people overseas, win for the exchequer, win for the universities, and so forth.
And I guess this talks to some of the kind of, and I think you've posed a number of conundrums for us and our visitors, because there is that element of, if you see how for me you can't educate one student for £9,000 a year is that makes my brow furrow a little bit. But let's say that that's the case. I guess it's that thing around that you touched on earlier around taxation, but balancing that off against cost, because you could argue that, well, if you've been away for the last 5 years, you haven't paid those taxes, then you don't get to take advantage of that bonus £9,000 cost. But I guess the flip side to that is that um, the state hasn't had to educate your child through secondary school for the last
Good
5 years. So is this is this where a lot of these arguments sort of balance on this taxation versus representation kind
Yeah,
of
no, it's a good point. And by proposing this middle fee, which I think we worked out, which should be about 11 or 12,000, so more than the home fee but less than the foreign fee, that is a gesture, towards what you're saying, that you haven't been putting into the exchequer the last few years anyway. You may have done earlier, but then seeing the benefit that has somebody who's got English coming back, learning more about the mother country, perhaps working here, or even if they go overseas, because their lives are now overseas, they will have a warm feeling about having had their education in Britain and so forth. So on the cost side and on the benefit side, it just makes sense. And there are some little things like on bank accounts. That's another one, John, we haven't talked about. You may have been caught up on that. A quirk, well, not a quirk, but a kind of bureaucratic thing, because of all the concern about money laundering. Banks in the UK are asking properly questions about who their customers are. But what they've done is, as soon as they see an overseas address, they go, oh, closing the bank account. So we have members and supporters whose UK bank accounts are simply turned off. They're not money launderers. There's absolutely no suspicion, but the banks just say, oh, it's just easier. We don't know who they are really. And of course, if you don't have a UK bank account, it's very hard for you to pay your taxes or whatever that John's got to do every year. It just is crackers that something as simple as keeping a UK bank account is so difficult for so many people overseas. And that should be very easy to fix.
Thank you. We had some kind of technical issues in the background, but Ian, hopefully you're back there. Sorry, Mike, did you have something to add on there, especially kind of the stuff about bank accounts?
I've been quite lucky.
I'm now getting you both confused. My apologies, John. Sorry.
No, I've been pretty lucky on the bank account thing. I did have one bank account that was suddenly closed, but I think they just closed them all. There was a Scottish bank in the UK that I think just basically decided to shut down. So I don't think it had anything to do with me being abroad. It was just it just happened. Anyway, but other bank accounts I have in the UK I've been able to keep open. So I haven't really suffered from that problem, but I have heard about other people who've had that problem. Yeah, I think that's another one.
Yeah, so I think we pretty well covered the biggest issues. Pensions is an obvious one, and that could be phased back in without it being prohibitively expensive, and it is only kind of giving people what they've contributed to and should have as of right. Bank accounts, very simple. It's just people don't kind of think it through. So we're here to say that. Visas is the tricky one because the rules are complete. It just makes no sense at present. Well, it makes no sense. They have grown up over time and are now caught up in this desperate attempt to kind of reduce the numbers without thinking first principles. So actually, I'm not sure we've talked about what we want to see on spousal visas is a category of people which for British people who have a spouse who isn't British. So you've got one Brit, one non-Brit. If they want to come and live here, there should be a pathway that they can do. So, it's got to be a legitimate spouse. Ideally, you show some length of commitment. We've got members and supporters who've been kind of married 20 years. And because they fall foul of these income rules that John was talking about, they can't bring it in. So you could have some extra points for a genuine relationship that's endured, perhaps where you've lived it. So on visas, there is a way through, but we recognise that is tricky and would need to be thought through. University fees, there's a very simple way through. So on most of these issues, when you understand there's a problem and you think about it rationally, there are way throughs that are wins for the individuals and wins, we think, for the country as a whole.
But I guess it kind of speaks back to what your overarching point is without any representation, you won't get those issues addressed.
Totally. Absolutely. So thank you you might want to put up the link or put it in the chat to how people can register to vote. And obviously we'd love people to go and visit bovf.org.uk and sign up either as a supporter or, better still, a small membership fee, which gives us some money to pay our running costs. That's all it does.
Yeah, I've been sharing both in the live chat as we've been going along. So although I've not put them on the screen, and I'll also when we're done, I'll put them into the descriptions, etc. So they'll be there for anybody that wants to watch back later, or if there's anybody that is just listening rather than watching, then they'll be in the description. So please do go find there. But that's a nice point for me to say. Please do remember to like, comment, share and subscribe. Don't forget, Facebook only keep videos for a month now, so the best way to kind of make sure that you have access to all of our content is to either follow us on your podcaster of choice, or to subscribe to us on YouTube and hit that notification bell. And you can even ask Alexa to play the latest episode of the Pompey Politics podcast if you like to do all of that stuff. So
perfect. Well, I guess we'd better give our final word to our guests in terms of, if there's one message you'd like overseas voters and politicians to take away from today's podcast in a quick summary, what would that be? And I'll ask that to John first.
Okay, yes, thanks. I mean, I think the key thing really is we think there's sort of a middle ground we can find with a lot of these things. So, Mike mentioned about the university fees, where we'd have this kind of middle ground. I think the same is probably true of some of the other areas as well, like the spousal visas, where I think somebody who's British and is married to somebody from overseas, it should be made easier for them to move back to the UK if they want to. So I think we can find a kind of a middle ground on a lot of these issues.
Perfect, thank you. And Mike?
Yeah, totally. And I'll just second that. And I think whether you're overseas and personally infected by this, register, contribute to our policy formation, come and help us. And if you're in the UK, so not perhaps directly affected, but are involved in the political system, then please do follow this kind of rational approach to understanding there's a problem, figuring out what we should do about it. So, and I suppose the final thing from me is to thank you guys for running your podcast, for approaching these issues in a sort of sensible, rational sort of way, and thanks for having us on.
Yeah,
absolutely our pleasure. So you've been listening to the Pompey Politics Podcast. I've been Ian Tiny Morris.
And I've been Simon Sansbury. We've been joined today by Mike Tuffrey and John Shardlow from British Overseas Voters Forum. Join us at our normal time next week, which is 6:27 p.m. on Sunday, and that's GMT, of course, when we'll be getting an update on what's happening with the controversial Aquin interconnector application that is due to drag an electricity cable over from France and dig a inconvenient trench through basically up through Portsmouth. So join us then. But thank you very much both, and we'll see everyone next week. Thank you. Don't forget to like, follow and comment on Facebook, or comment and subscribe on YouTube. Find us on all the social media platforms: Facebook, X, YouTube, Threads, LinkedIn.